a reminder that if you have any questions as we go through, please feel free to put them on Slido. And usually during the breakout conversations, I walk around the room, so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of me, I'm also very happy to answer them at that point in time. I love the fact that there was a lot of energy in the room, a lot of people. I heard snippets of conversations, people talking about the way I used to be, the way I am now, or the way I am at home compared to the way I am at work. And that's true because our behaviour is often very situational and what I call interactional. So it depends on the situation we're in and the people we're interacting with, as well as what's going on inside of us at any given point in time. And it can produce different patterns. But a question for you is, would you like to show up more consistently as warm and strong? Would you like to find a way of being able to create benefit for the people around you and be more successful in your leadership by being more consistent and more effective in showing up with warmth and strength? Because if you do, you're on the right track. I know leaders at various stages of their career, some of them incredibly successful and very well known, who have very deliberately worked on this for many years. And the truth is, if we want to be change makers, we have to first change ourselves. Because when you think about it, in the complex system that's out there, the complex system of interactions and relationships and dynamics, the only part of the system that we have direct control over is us. And what we choose to do and not do, what we choose to say and not say, and how we do it. That bit we can choose to control if we decide to be choiceful and deliberate and intentional with our leadership, which is typically where the best leadership comes from. But the truth is, folks, a lot of our leadership isn't deliberate, choiceful, and intentional. It's automatic, it's habitual, it's triggered, and it's instantaneous, and it just turns up. But if you are prepared to do the inner work, then I want to share with you a way of thinking about doing this inner work, which I hope will help you make progress. The first is that there are three yous. The first you is the perceived you. That is the memory of you that people's brains have, which causes them to be predisposed towards you or away from you. The shadow you have cast and the memory that they now have. The second you is the outer you. These are the acts, your behaviours, the actions that produce the experience of you, which creates the willingness of people to be mobilised by you or not mobilised by you. But there's another you, and that's the inner you. And this is the bit of you that people don't get to see. Because it's all of the thinking, conscious and non-conscious. Did you know of the 11 million bits of data that you process in any given moment? You're only conscious and aware of 47 bits. The remaining 10,999,953 are being processed beyond your consciousness, beyond your awareness, beyond your control, automatically, habitually. A lot of that, as I mentioned before, is to do with physiology and biology, but there's a whole lot of it which is to do with making sense of the world as it comes in through your five senses, and a lot of it's to do with deciding how you're then going to react to the world. That's the inner you. And a bunch of that you're not in control of, at least not deliberately, consciously, choicefully in most moments. But nonetheless, it produces our reactions and our behaviour. And it just so happens that in the last 10 to 15 years, some incredibly helpful insights have emerged in research to allow us to understand how we can do this work on the inner you or the inner me. We used to think that what would happen is that as children and adolescents, we'd go through these very clear stages of development. Some of you may have studied psychology, I'm sure you have, and you know this to be true. But we used to assume that we'd emerge into adulthood and that our operating system, our mind, if you like, not our brain, our mind, the way that we make sense of the world and ourselves and our role within the world, we used to think that that pretty much would be largely formed and set by the time we emerged into adulthood. And then as adults, all we would do is add new data into it, onto the existing operating system, new apps, new techniques, new skills, new knowledge, new experiences, but otherwise the system was reasonably fixed. But that is not true. That our complexity of mind can evolve through adulthood. In other words, the operating system can evolve through adulthood, but it doesn't for everybody. In fact, 70% of adults remain in what we call the socialised mind, They emerge into adulthood and they stay there. Less than 30% of adults, their minds evolve to become more complex, and they're able to deal with greater complexity as a consequence. Less than 1% evolve into what we call the self-transforming mind. Now let me tell you a little bit about each of these stages of development. The first, the socialised mind. This is the mind that is given to us by our life experiences pre-adulthood. It's what the world teaches us, how the world teaches us what is true and what is not, what is right, what is wrong, what just is. This is the world and this is how it works. And often we learn how to operate within that world by taking up roles. These become our identity, and we have many roles: sister, brother, daughter, son, maybe father, mother, employee, manager, marketer, accountant, whatever it might be. And you notice each of these roles has a script. You know, the world tells you this is what a good mother looks like, or this is what a good accountant looks like, or this is what a good son looks like. And we're meant to dutifully play that role the way that is scripted, the way that we were taught through our childhoods and our adolescence. And that's what we do. We just play the role the way that it's been written. And this mind thinks binary, black and white, right or wrong, no grey, no ambiguity. It's either that or it doesn't. The self-authoring mind, less than 30% of adults evolve to this, but you've probably had this experience yourself where you start to go, look, I know the world tells me this is the way it should be, but I don't think that's the way it should be. I know the world tells me that this is right, but I don't think that's right. I think this is right. And in fact, I'm starting to self-author my own beliefs about the world and my role within it. And I start to understand that the roles, the identities that have been given to me by the world, I don't have to play them dutifully that way because no one can do all of those roles perfectly. Any female who's attempted to be successful in their career in a genuinely invested sense and successful as, for example, a mother or a carer knows it's bullshit. You can't play those roles perfectly. There are always trade-offs and compromises, and to try and do both or to try and do it all simultaneously just will leave you with burnout. And so we start to recognise that there are limitations to the identities that we've been asked to play. They hold us back in some way. They hold me back in some way. And this is a mind that starts to understand it's not just black and white, that there are many different versions of the truth. Maybe there's two different versions of the truth. Maybe these two things that I thought were polar opposites are not. Strength and warmth, maybe. Maybe they can exist in the same space and time, and I'm going to challenge myself to work with that. What if we could take the pursuit of profit with environmental sustainability? What if we could put those two things together? We've been grappling with that for decades. We're starting to make some progress with it. That's the kind of mind that can grapple with those dualities. And then there's a third stage. Less than 1% of adults move to this stage, and that's the mind that transforms systems of belief. It says, I recognise that there's many belief systems, and some of those belief systems are very helpful. There are aspects of some which are not, and they hold us all back. And I am going to act in the world to challenge that belief system. And you know what that looks like. You guys probably work with tons of people who are trying to do this in the world. This is a mind that's able to embrace conflicts and identity and say, there's always going to be conflicts and trade-offs, and there's a dark and there's a light, and I've just got to get comfortable with that and negotiate my way through that. And I need to understand that there's not just one or two versions of the truth. There are many, many, many different versions of the truth. It just depends on where you stand and your interpretation. Because if you're going to influence people, you can't lead people from where you are. You have to understand where they're at and lead them from there. That means you have to understand their thinking, how they think about the world, their belief system, what it compels them to do and to not do, and engage with that. So the only mind, complexity of mind, that can do that well is typically this third stage. It's where this incredibly powerful version of leadership comes from. And we know it's an incredibly powerful version of leadership because there's studies which show this to be true. So one of them, by Kevin Eagle, what they took is 21 CEOs and 21 middle managers. They assessed them at being different stages of development, either at the socialised or self-authoring, and then they looked at their leadership effectiveness. And here's what they found. Very clearly, that the greater the adult mental complexity or the mental complexity or evolution of the mind of the leader produced vastly superior results. And they've tracked this through not just in terms of leadership effectiveness, but also results. anything from return on assets, return on investment, revenue, profitability, customer service, all sorts of things. But here's the study that really blew my mind. David Rook and Bill Talbot, the leadership gurus, teach at Stanford. Bill's now retired. They took two groups of CEOs and they said, wouldn't it be interesting to actually understand what impact does the CEO have on the organisation's ability to adapt over time? You think about it, there are many institutions and organisations right now in a rapidly changing world who are trying to innovate themselves and evolve and learn and grow so that they can be successful next year and in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. Because we can't keep just doing what we've always done. We have to continue to evolve and grow. In which case, what role does the CEO play in allowing the organisation to do that? And what role does the complexity of mind of the CEO have on that? So they took these two groups of CEOs. This one group, Group A, they had identified as being evolved to the socialised mind. These are still intellectually smart people, so please don't confuse IQ with mental complexity. They're two different things. These are people who, CEOs who've been successful in leading companies, but who are assessed at the socialised mind. They took another group who were assessed as being beyond the socialised mind. They then tracked them over 15 years and the success of their organisations going through different stages of transformation and change. And what they found was that the group who had been assessed as beyond the socialised mind, each of those CEOs had on average led 3 successful transformations of their organisations. Of the CEOs who had been assessed at the socialised mind, collectively they had led exactly 0 transformations. Now think about the implications of this. That if our job as leaders is to mobilise people, to be change makers, to change the systems around us, the systems of belief and action and thought and practice and habit, it appears that that is dependent upon us growing beyond the socialised mind into something else. And that is where often I find when I work with clients where the work is. I've got many clients who've done all the outside work. They've been to every course. They've gone to every single breakfast. They've learned about curiosity. They've learned about how to listen well. They've learned about resilience. They've learned about being an open system. All the sorts of things that you've probably encountered in the breakfast series. Wonderful topics, incredibly important. And it's quite possible you've taken some of those and been able to apply them. But I have lots of clients who understand what they should be doing, but they still struggle to do it. They struggle to make progress with this stuff. And it's partly because the internal system, the operating system, the complexity of mind hasn't evolved enough to accommodate that different way of doing things. But of course, if I'm to explain to you and we're to investigate this, we have to understand that the story about who you are right now actually begins a lot earlier. Well before you walked into this room, well before you woke up this morning, in fact, going back to your childhood and your adolescence. And there's a particular stage that I want to focus on, and that's the teenage years. But before we do, quick little exercise. This is just a personal reflection. It should only take about 10 seconds. I'd like you to finish this statement, because you are all successful people. You're here, you managed to dress yourselves this morning, you're clearly functional in what you do. I want you to finish this statement. I've been successful because I have been, and just finish with one word. Just write down any word that comes to mind. Don't overthink it. Just write it down. One word. There's no right answer. What I find is that most people write down a word that reflects one of 3 different ways of being in the world. And we've learnt how to be in the world through our adolescence. So if you think about it, during childhood, pre-teenage years, the world was given to us. People looked after us. They gave us everything that we needed, either our parents, for the most of us, our parents or our carers or our teachers. They all gave us what we needed. But you know what? As an adult, the world doesn't give you what you need just like that. You've got to earn it. You've got to find a way of doing a deal with the world in which you get what you need from the world by turning up a particular way. And the teenage years are all about learning that. Learning how to get what we need from the world by showing up in a way which is going to produce that. Ideally in a functional way. In fact, less than 5% of adolescents don't learn how to do that, and they mostly end up being marginalised or in prison. But most of us, we engage through our teenage years, and we probably leverage things that we'd started to learn about ourselves or believe about ourselves earlier on. So one of the ways in which people start to learn how to navigate how to get what they want from the world is the ones who are told that hard work is important. You might have been told by your parents, or you might have learnt this, that the harder you work, the more rewards you got. We say not just money, but validation, acknowledgement, love maybe. By working hard, I'm worth something. And so we learn how to work hard, and we learn that that's actually how to be successful in the world, and we emerge into adulthood as hard workers. We take control of things. We make shit happen. Anyone got that identity? I think the vast majority of you probably do. You chose to be here, which means you probably like to make things happen. The second identity that a lot of people form, and it's not singular, it's not just one identity that we form, is the identity around intelligence. So this is the identity around, you get told earlier on, you're smart. And you probably get this told to you through your grades, through school, you pick things up, and so you learn to be smart. And you learn that if I am smart, I actually get the rewards. Until we emerge into adulthood and we like to be smart, we like to have the answers, we like to be the expert. And the third identity which can often form is relationships one. This is the one where we learn early on in life that people matter and that we might be good at relationships. And any middle children in the room? Yeah, you know this one. You know, the Switzerland, the peacekeeper. Or you might have learnt that that's just the role that you play in your family or your friends and in the system, and you learn that you're valued for that. So you emerge into adulthood, I'm that person. So we've got these three identities. The first is I am my results, my volition, my agency, my action, my making things happen, my taking control. I have one particular client, a coaching client, who very much was this identity. He was an executive chef of, at the time, an executive chef of a couple of restaurants that had both received very high levels of awards and accolades. The highest you can get. And he was very young, he was in his early 30s. But he came to me because his boss was worried he was burning out. Because he would work 16, 17-hour days. He would go home and sleep, and that's it. He would have 12 cups of coffee by the time 3 o'clock in the afternoon came around. And what had happened was he'd learned to be very successful as a chef in one restaurant that was highly awarded, and then he was asked to be an executive chef of 2. And rather than changing the way he did things, what he did is he just said, well, everything that I've been doing at this one, I'm going to do exactly the same over here, and both at the same time. Now, you can kind of imagine what's going to emerge in terms of perfectionism and micromanaging and controlling and doing it my way kind of stuff, which is exactly what happened. And he was burning out, and he also had a young family at home. And he was getting feedback from his team that he wasn't empowering. His boss was saying, you're going to burn out. And his wife was starting to say to him, this is just not sustainable. But that's the identity. And where did he learn this identity? From his father. His father was was incredibly well-known barrister who would often take on some of the most difficult public defence cases and would often win. And what he would see of his father, when his father was in pre-trial and trial, was his father would just focus and block everything out and just work incredibly hard. And he learnt as a child that's how to be successful in the world. And that's the way he learnt to be successful in the world. It's just who he was. Second identity is my expertise. I have this one. This is my intelligence, my knowledge, my insight. As a child, I mentioned before, I was bullied in primary school, so I didn't get a lot of validation from my classmates. And my parents were reasonably unemotional people, very rational, intellectual, so I didn't get a lot of acknowledgement and validation through physical acts of love. But what I learnt to do was actually that if I had the answers in class, the teacher would say, well done, Gerard. Aren't you smart? Aren't you a good boy? And if I came home with a really good report card, I would get a well done, Gerard, from my parents. And that's how I received love. That's how I learnt to be worthwhile in the world. And then that's what you build. An identity which is about using my intelligence. And that can be incredibly helpful in many situations, but not in all situations, to be the one who has the answers or someone who has answers. And then the third identity that we might form is the identity about my relationships. My connection, my loyalty, my belonging and identification with others. Does anyone suspect that they have this one? This is the one where you just focus particularly on people and connection and belonging. And you'll know it's true because what will probably happen is you might struggle with things like conflict and holding people accountable, Or there's this little voice in your mind that says, if you do this, you'll be at risk of being disliked. That identity is a really important one. Holds our societies and groups together. I had a client, let's call her Kay, who'd been promoted to VP of a very challenging organisation on the basis that she was very connecting, relationships driven, built great loyalty. But Kay was now in a position where she was going head to head with someone who wasn't built that way at all. This person was literally the opposite of her. Loved tension, loved conflict, loved arguments. And Kay was really struggling with those meetings, those environments. She often just wanted to kind of give in and just connect. But this other person was just not interested in that. And she didn't know how to make progress. But that was her identity. That's what she'd learnt in life. So we have these three identities. And they are so strong. They're so embedded in our thinking and being and in the world that it's just the lens through which we see the world. Now, I'm not sure if you can make sense of this. This fellow has got a fly on the lens of his glasses. But he's not even aware, because it's just the way he sees the world. And so these identities, they filter. We filter everything we experience through these identities, and our choices about how we respond are also filtered through those identities. And here's the deal. The deal that we do is that our mind learns that if I turn up this way, that to be controlling or to be intelligent or to be good with relationships is a strength. That to be worthwhile is to be that. To be secure in the world and safe in the world is to be this. To be okay, I will be okay if I am that. In fact, to be, actually that's just the only way of being. Is anyone here, I know we've got one person from People and Culture here. Anyone else from Human Resources? Great, welcome. Anyone here who's really strongly commercially orientated from a sales part of the business, just got to go out and earn revenue? And you're willing to, come on, declare it, own it. It's a really important function. I often see in organisations sometimes this clash, and I'm going to use these as stereotypes. You know, you have a HR function often relationships oriented, and then you have this function which is about results. And sometimes it's finance. Anyone from finance? I'm not disparaging, but it's a really important role. It's about results, making shit happen, operating with the facts. And you get these two groups that actually often struggle to see eye to eye. They actually, you can see it, because one group's all about people and the other one's about results. And they can even struggle to have a coherent conversation where they can actually see the world from each other's perspectives. So this plays out in the world. My wife and I are like this. You know, I'm typically more about rational thought and making things happen, and she has always been about love and empathy and compassion and connection. And I have learnt an extraordinary amount through her. People say to me, what's the best development course you've ever been on? I always say, get married. And be committed to it. Because the moment that it gets really hard, that you want to leave, is the moment, that's the moment where you're probably on the cusp of learning the most important thing that you need to learn. So what we then end up having is these leadership patterns. So if we load up leadership as an act on top of these identities, this is what we get. So we have character that's associated with each of these identities. Relating, which is all about connection and warmth. Intelligence, which is all about using our minds to interpret the world, our brains, our rationality, our intellect. And then we have control, which is all about making stuff happen by being strong and tough and driving and resilient. So this is the character structure. But what behaviours does it produce? So these are the behaviours produced, the really helpful behaviours produced by those identities. The relating behaviours are all about holding things together. I mean, our societies would not work unless someone was doing that. The protecting identity, the intelligence identity, is all about using our rationality to actually make progress rather than acting as emotional, impulsive creatures, which would probably result in anarchy. And then the control identity is all about making stuff happen to make tomorrow better than today, to make progress. These are all incredibly important behaviours, and they make our world work. They make our organisations work. Without each of them, we cannot succeed. But here's the thing. When that identity is so strong, it drives everything that you do, automatically, instantaneously, particularly when you're busy and you're under load, particularly when you're being asked to do something that's difficult and hard, we rely on those automatic, instinctual, instantaneous behaviours to get us through the day. And when they're our strengths, and then when we play to our strengths, too much, here's what you get. And you probably can see that those helpful behaviours are all belong to the catalyst pattern, strength and warmth. These behaviours which are over here, they actually all produce the ordinary patterns of leadership. So when I get tired and I'm fatigued and I'm under pressure, I can go quickly to telling the answer. I can become defensive. I can stop focusing on people and just focus on the result and the outcome. Other people have different extensions, different limitations. And so what we can see is these identities not only help us, but they potentially can hold us back. So I'm going to ask you to have a think about it, and now we're going to work in groups of 4. So you've got the pair that you were working in before. I want you to pair up with another pair, if you can. And as best you can, then as a group, just start to have this conversation around which identity does my behaviour most closely resemble? Now, you might have more than one identity. You might say, I am both relationships and intelligence. You might say, I'm actually all 3. Now, you might believe that to be true, but if you were to ask the people around you, they'll probably tell you something different. So in a moment, I'm going to put the previous slide back to give you something to reflect upon.